Okay, so who are the people that you're going to see? Well, you're going to meet Buck Turgidson, General Buck Turgidson. And he's an Air Force general, right? Because the Air Force has generals, Marines have generals, the Army has generals, the Navy has admirals and captains and commanders. It's a different rank scheme. Same idea, though. I can't remember. They know a rear admiral is the equivalent of a two-star general. There's all these rank equivalents. You can look them up. Yeah, okay. Naval Air Force has its own rank structure and so on. Okay, so in this case, Buck Turgidson, who is this sort of manly man, and he's played beautifully. This is arguably, even despite Patton, I would say this is George C. Scott's most astonishing role. He just is so perfect. He is such a little boy with his great, amazing weapons. And, the other thing he doesn't have is a doomsday device. And as he says to Staines, who was actually played by a Canadian, Jesus, Staines, I wish we had one of them doomsday devices, so he's a boy, right, in a toy shop, and he's like, I want one of those, and I want one of these. And these are the people who will oversee the building of the world's biggest nuclear arsenal. And we'll talk about that. So, but he's also he's literally this belly slapping, like there's that wonderful moment where he slaps his stomach, and he's just completely sort of this erect. There are the two sort of erect phalluses that are walking around. He's one of them. And the one, of course, is Jack D. Ripper, who is terrified of being emasculated. But Buck Turgidson is shown with the only woman in the text, right, Miss Scott, who it turns out has had a bit of a relationship with maybe a number of the Air Force generals. So she's a sexual prize is the point. Okay, then there's Jack D. Ripper. Okay, that's subtle. And this is the Sterling Hayden character. And again, he turns in an astonishing performance as this guy. Completely compelling. Is this guy who's just completely lost it. He's just gone paranoid. He's just a fully functioning paranoid schizophrenic who is also sociopathic and just sends off the wing to start a nuclear war. And knowing that once you start essentially there's one strike, there will be a nuclear war unless there's some kind of deal. This was taken up in an earlier, apparently saner film called Failsafe with Peter Fonda as the American president. Yeah, that's right. And it's just not as compelling. And Kubrick thought about using the book. There was also a book called Red Alert, because a red alert meant potential nuclear war. This is really the focus, obviously, as you'll see. So Jack the Ripper, okay, so it's Jack the Ripper, the famous killer who was never caught. And probably it's a picture of Curtis LeMay. This is what everybody suspects, although there are a number of people that it could be. It's not as though there was a lack of crazy Air Force generals around. These guys were real. They ran these SAC headquarters. They were members of the Strategic Air Command, which was a real thing and still is. It's been modified a lot because of what the contemporary nuclear picture looks like, which we'll talk about. Merkin Muffley is the president, also played by Peter Sellers, and he's basically this balding executive, who seems to be reasonably on his game, but he doesn't exactly remember the policies he's made. For instance, he doesn't remember the policy of Plan R, which is very serious indeed. And so the military is able to use Plan R and get around civilian command because the president is the only one who is supposed to be able to initiate a nuclear strike. Those are the rules in America. Canada luckily doesn't have nuclear weapons, so we don't have a nuclear weapons policy because we don't have them. The members of the nuclear club are America, Britain, Israel, although they never agree that they have them, China, Russia, India, Pakistan, Iran. No. I'm at 7. There are 9. That's always happens. France, not Germany. not Italy. That's 8. This is like naming the 7 dwarves. So there's one more. And basically, yeah, okay. So these are the people who have nuclear weapons. So these are the nations that have nuclear weapons on the planet. Everybody else does not. It's sort of that simple. Muffley is basically a kind of a he's kind of been rolled over by the Air Force and by the generals, and you see them all sitting around there, and he talks. He's very, he's quite forceful with Buck Turgidson, and he does his best as a diplomat, but at the same time, he also caves in, and so hence his name, because his name is a merkin is a pubic wig. It's actually quite a long history, and muffly is at the time the word muff was used for a vagina, really for a woman who, this doesn't seem to be the thing anymore, but anyway, a woman who actually had pubic hair. So American muffly is like a pussy. It's sort of the simplest way to put it. So he's not a real man. Everything is about manliness, manhood. Then we have Group Captain Lionel Mandrake, and Mandrake is this very prissy sort of quintessential Brit, played by Peter Sellers again, and he does an amazing job. Sellers is just such an astonishing talent, and he is this. Of course, the Americans were convinced that most Brits were queer because of this precise way they spoke, and this tendency of queer men in America to be tagged as being queer at the time was a seriously dangerous thing. I mean, being a communist was bad, and being queer was just above it. It could end your career, or it could end your life. I mean, it was just very, very dangerous. To be known, to be out, was extremely dangerous, and most men weren't out. It didn't really happen until the 70s, and even then it was still very, very dangerous because the homophobia was so strong. And so Mandrake, so this is what happens when the American Marine arrives, Group Captain Bat Guano. Oh, these names are so good. And he says, I think you're a deviated prevert. In other words, you're homosexual. So a mandrake is actually a root that looks like a human being. So this character is he's sort of like a walking root. He's not really a person. I am Groot. Then we get Dr. Strangelove. And Strangelove is a direct translation of his German name, which Stain says, and it is which is Strange Love. And presumably he is Werner von Braun, who was the author of the German rocket, the V2 rockets, the V2 rocket program at Peenemünde in Germany, and who, I mean, what the Nazis did, which was lucky for everybody, was they steered away from the atomic bomb and towards intercontinental ballistic missiles. That is, missiles which could fly across a continent and hit another country. And that's what we've got now. And but they didn't have them then. They didn't have the rocketry for it, and they didn't have the power for it, and they didn't have any of that stuff, so they had to develop it. And von Braun oversaw that program. He was denazified, and he was put immediately to work in the American space program, and making boosters for ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles. So von Braun is a strange character because he was a Nazi. He was a party member. And there's all kinds of, but he wasn't really a Nazi. No, he was a Nazi. And he was a young man, so he was just at the beginning of his career. He was a brilliant physicist. And he was denazified, which is a strange process we can talk about. if you like. And but basically, after a couple of years in this case, I think it was the Air Force, he was essentially declared clean. He became a citizen. He was made into an American citizen because they needed his expertise. And he began to run the Redstone rocket program, the Atlas rocket program, and the Saturn V rocket program. And the Saturn V was what they were going to use to put people on the moon. And so when Kennedy said in '61, yeah, we were going to put a person on the moon, it was von Braun's technology and leadership basically that made that happen by '69 when Armstrong stepped on the moon. Okay. So that's Dr. Strangelove. But he's so this is why half of him has got the crooked, the crippled hand with the black glove on it. And this is why he, half of him talks to my president, and the other half says, it would not be difficult, mein Führer. I mean, my president, because he's still a Nazi. And that's the point about this character, is that von Braun was denazified. Well, lots of people said, what do you mean he's denazified? You once a Nazi, always a Nazi. How do you denazify somebody? Well, partly because von Braun later said, by the early '70s, von Braun became a born-again Christian. And I'm not sure what's worse in this particular case, because it was just so toxic and dangerous. Anyway, another whole discussion. Then there is Ambassador Desadsky. And that's a fairly obvious one. It's just the Marquis de Sade. And so it's just kind of fun because he's this sort of, and he's so prim. He's like, I'm offended. But he also has the trigger that sets off the doomsday device. So he's not to be trifled with. Then there's Premier Kissoff, who is Premier Khrushchev, and Colonel Bat Guano, who is the leader of the Bat Guano. Guano is shit. So it's this combination of with birds, and you get there is no separation between the urethra and the anus. So you just get this sort of combination of blop. If a bird poops on you, it's guano. It's called guano, and they actually use it for. It has to be purified, obviously, but they use it. There are chemical compounds that they use, and as the basis for face cream. So it was actually a valuable thing. So his name is Bat Guano. So it's bat shit. Okay.